In the spring of 1242, the most dangerous army the world had ever seen stood at the edge of Europe. It had crossed frozen rivers, shattered the knights of Poland and Hungary in a single season, and sent riders probing the roads towards Vienna. Nothing in front of it could hold, and then it turned around and rode home. For nearly 800 years we have been told why. The great Khan Ojde had died far away in Mongolia, and the princes were recalled to choose his heir. A death, a coincidence, a lucky accident of timing. Europe was saved by a funeral. It is a tidy story. It is also, at best, only half true, because that same army stopped again in Syria, and in the passes of Vietnam, and on the beaches of Japan. Different enemies, different years, different excuses. But look at where the Mongol Empire actually ends, trace its border on a map, and something strange appears. The line does not follow the strongest enemies. It does not follow the great rivers or the mountain walls. It follows something quieter and far harder to kill. So here is the question this video is going to answer. What actually stops an army that no enemy has ever halted? The Mongols were not beaten into that shape. They were fed into it. To see it, we have to stop looking at the men and start looking at what they were riding. We tend to imagine the Mongol soldier as the weapon, the composite bow, the feigned retreat, the discipline. All of that is real, but none of it moves an inch without the animal underneath it, and the Mongol way of war rested on a simple, brutal ratio. Each warrior did not ride one horse. He rode a string of them, on average 5 or 6, most of them mares. When one tired, he changed to the next, so the army could keep moving while its mounts recovered in rotation. The mares gave milk, which meant the herd was not only transport, it was food on the hoof. An army that carries its own supply lines in its saddle does not wait for a baggage train. That is why the Mongols could appear 100 kilometers from where anyone expected them. But a strength and a limit are often the same fact seen from two sides. 5 or 6 horses per man is a spectacular engine. It is also an enormous mouth. A single Mongol column did not need a road or a granary. It needed grass. Tens of thousands of horses, eating every day, every march, forever. And grass does not grow everywhere. Now hold that number against another one. When Genghis Khan unified the steppe tribes and mustered his army, that whole force came to something on the order of 130,000 men, not a limitless horde. Roughly, the entire adult male population of the Mongol heartland, called to the saddle at once. The manpower of a nomad empire had a ceiling, and the ceiling was demographic. There simply were not more Mongols. So the popular picture inverts the truth. The chronicles speak of hordes 500,000 strong. The realistic figure for the invasion of Europe in 1241 is closer to 40, perhaps 70,000 across every column combined. The Mongols almost never won by weight of numbers. They won by concentration, speed, and terror, multiplying a modest force until it seemed like a flood. And that forces a question the swagger usually hides. If there were never very many of them, and if every one of them dragged a herd that had to eat, then this army was not unlimited at all. It was a machine with a fuel gauge. The only thing we have to work out is what the fuel was, and where on the earth it ran out. There is a second trap waiting here, and it is worth naming before we go further, because almost every documentary walks straight into it. Our sources for the Mongols are magnificent, and they are compromised. The two richest are Persian. Juveni wrote his history while serving as a Mongol governor, the man Hulagu appointed over Baghdad after helping to take it. Rashid al-Din, whose great compendium is the closest thing we have to an official record, was vizier to the Mongol rulers of Iran, and he was writing decades after the events, not as a witness, but as a servant of the dynasty he described. From the other direction, the Arab historian Ibn al-Athir gave us the line every script loves to quote, that since God created Adam, the world had seen no catastrophe like the Mongols. It is a magnificent sentence. It is also a lament, written far from the fighting, by a man who tells us plainly that he shrank from writing it at all. None of these men are lying. But one group is flattering its masters and the other is mourning its world. When they hand us a number, they are not counting, they are testifying. So when we ask how far the Mongols really reached, we cannot trust what their scribes felt. We need something that does not exaggerate and does not grieve. We need the grass. Start with the beginning, because even the birth of the empire has grass written under it. For a long time, the rise of Genghis Khan was explained by character. A hard man, a hard people, a genius for war. Then climate scientists read the tree rings of central Mongolia, year by year back through the centuries, and they found something no chronicle records. In the years around 1211 to 1225, exactly as the Mongol expansion caught fire, the steppe passed through an unusually warm and wet spell. Rain on grassland means grass. Grass means horses and cattle and sheep. The engine of conquest was, quite literally, better fed than it had ever been. That does not make the weather the general. Genghis still had to build the army, break the tribes, and point them outward. But it tells us where to look. If an abundance of grass helped light the fire, then the absence of grass should tell us where the fire finally went out. The rise gives us the rule. Now we test it against the map. Because if this empire really ran on pasture, then its edges, wherever they fell, should trace the edge of the pasture itself. Let us go and stand on that border. The Eurasian steppe is one of the great features of the planet, a belt of open grassland running for thousands of kilometers from Mongolia and Manchuria in the east, across Central Asia, north of the Caspian and the Black Sea, and reaching at its very western tip into the plains of Hungary. That western tip matters more than almost anything else in this story. The Hungarian plain, the puszta, is the last true tongue of the steppe. Beyond it, Europe closes in. The land breaks up into forest, hill, hedge, and castle, cut by rivers and cluttered with stone walls. It is superb country for a settled kingdom. It is poor country for 100,000 grazing horses. Now lay the Mongol conquests over that belt of grass. In the east and the center, the fit is almost embarrassing. The empire pours along the grassland corridor at the speed of the pasture itself. And in the west, the great advance runs out of momentum at precisely the point where the grassland runs out. The Mongols reached the Hungarian plain and swept it. They reached the far edge of the Hungarian plain and stopped. That is either a remarkable coincidence, or it is the whole answer. To find out which, we have to go south, to the place where the argument stops being a map and starts having a date. The year is 1260. The place is a valley in Galilee called Jalut, the spring of Goliath. Here the histories tell us the impossible finally happened. The Mongols were defeated. An army of Egyptian Mamluks, former slave soldiers, met a Mongol force in open battle and destroyed it. The spell of invincibility was broken. It is remembered as the moment the tide turned. Almost every part of that memory needs correcting, and each correction points the same way. First, Jalut was not the first time a Mongol army had ever lost. 40 years earlier, in 1221, a prince of the old Persian Empire had already smashed a Mongol column at Parwin. Battles were lost before. What made Jalut different was not that the Mongols bled. It was that here, for the first time, they were permanently stopped from expanding into a whole region and never took it. And second, the army the Mamluks beat was not the horde of legend. It was a detachment. To understand why, go back one more year, to 1259. The great Khan Mongke had died on campaign in China. His brother Hulagu, who had just torn the heart out of the Islamic world, sacking Baghdad in 1258 and ending the caliphate, was deep in Syria with his main army. And on hearing of the death, Hulagu turned most of that army around and marched it back east, towards the pastures of the north, leaving only a covering force under his general Kitbuka to hold the conquest. The standard explanation is the same as Europe. A Khan dies, the princes go home to choose a successor. Politics. But the historian John Masson Smith looked harder at that withdrawal and asked a question the politics does not answer. Why take almost the whole army? If it were only about the succession, A prince and his household could ride east while the Tumans held the line. Instead, the fighting strength drained away, and it drained towards better grazing. Smith's answer is that Syria could not feed them. The Levant simply does not have the pasture to keep a full Mongol army, with its vast herd of remounts, standing through the dry season. Hulagu himself, in his own letters, complained that the food and the fodder had been eaten up. The army did not leave only because a man had died a continent away. It left because there was nothing left for the horses to eat. So look again at Ain Jalut with that in your mind. The Mamluks did not defeat the Mongol Empire. They defeated the fraction of it that the grass of Syria could still support, a detachment left behind when the main body retreated towards its pastures. The two forces that met in Galilee were roughly matched, perhaps 20,000 aside. For the first time in half a century, the Mongols came to a battlefield without the one advantage that had made them a nightmare, the surplus of horses that let them strike from any direction and never tire. That surplus was not taken by the Mamluks. It had been eaten by the country. The Mamluks were brave, and they were skillful, and they won a battle that genuinely mattered. But they were also standing in the one place where the Mongol machine had already run its tank down to fumes. They did not break the tide. They met it exactly where it had run out of water to rise on. This is the heart of it, so let me say it plainly. The southern border of the Mongol world, the line between the steppe and the desert Middle East, is not where the Mongols were beaten. It is where their fuel gave out. The Mamluks held the door, but it was the grass that had already decided how far the door could be pushed. And once you have seen that, you cannot unsee it, because the same shape appears everywhere the Mongols left the grassland. Not sometimes, every time. Follow them off the steppe, and the pattern becomes almost monotonous. Twice, in 1274 and again in 1281, Kublai Khan launched vast seaborne invasions of Japan. There is no pasture on the ocean at all. Both fleets were wrecked, the second catastrophically, and Japanese memory gave the storms a name, the divine wind, the kamikaze. We remember the typhoon. We forget that the Mongols were already operating in the one environment their entire system could not touch. Then there is the tropical south. In the humid mountains and flooded paddies of Vietnam, in the campaigns against Dai Viet and Champa, Mongol armies marched in and were swallowed by heat, disease, ambush, and terrain that gave a horse nothing to run on and nothing to eat. In 1293, an expedition was sent by sea as far as Java and came home with nothing. Jungle, ocean, mountain, swamp. Wherever the grass ended, the invincible army became an ordinary one, and often a defeated one. So the failures are not scattered bad luck. They cluster. They cluster exactly along the frontier where grassland gives way to something a horse cannot live on. The map is drawing itself now, but a good argument has to face its hardest case honestly, and there is one conquest that seems to break the entire rule. The Mongols conquered China, not the dry northern plains, which are steppe country and fell in the way you would expect, but the southern Song, the wettest, richest, most crowded civilization on earth, a world of rice paddies, great rivers, and walled cities with no grazing for 1,000 kilometers. This was the anti-steppe. Water where the Mongols needed dry ground, walls where they needed open field, mud where they needed footing, and 100 million people who had never lived any way but settled. By the theory you have just heard, the Mongols should have failed there. They did not. In 1279, the last Song resistance was destroyed, and all of China lay under Mongol rule. If the grass drew the border, how did they cross this one? The answer does not break the rule, it dates it. Because of all the Mongol conquests, the war on the southern Song was the longest and the least Mongol. It took more than 40 years, and to win it, the horse army had to stop being a horse army. The decisive struggle was the siege of Xiangyang, a pair of fortress cities on the Han River, and it lasted not days but years, from the late 1260s to 1273. Cavalry is useless against a river fort, so the Mongols, who had begun as pure horsemen, built a navy, thousands of ships, and fought for control of the water. When the walls still held, Kublai sent to his relatives in Persia for engineers, and 2 Muslim specialists arrived and built him counterweight trebuchets, siege machines of a power China had not seen, capable of throwing stones that cracked the towers open at last. Look at what that victory is actually made of. A navy, foreign engineers, siege artillery designed on the other side of the continent, Chinese infantry and Chinese defectors. The horse, the bow, and the open steppe, the things that made the Mongols Mongols, are almost nowhere in it. They took the rice south, yes, but only by setting down the tools of the grassland and picking up somebody else's. The exception does not disprove the border. It shows you the price of crossing it, and the price was to become a different empire. Which brings us back, at last, to that strange retreat from Europe, and to the story we started with. 1242. The army at the edge of the West turns for home. And here I have to be honest with you, because this is the one place where the grass argument is at its weakest, and you deserve to know that. The old explanation is the death of Ojdeh, and the recall to choose a Khan. In 2016, 2 scientists, Ulf Bunchen and Nicola D. Cosmo, proposed something more interesting. Reading the climate record, they argued that after the warm, dry years that had carried the invasion, the early months of 1242 turned suddenly cold and wet, that the Hungarian plain, that last tongue of steppe, flooded into marsh, and that the pasture the Mongols were counting on simply drowned. In their telling, the horses lost their footing and their feed, and an army that lived on grass had no reason to stay in a swamp. It is an elegant idea, and it fits everything I have shown you, which is exactly why I have to tell you that other historians think it is wrong. In 2017, a team led by the Hungarian scholars Zsolt Pink and Beatrix Ramhani published a direct rebuttal under the pointed title Climate of Doubt. Hungary, they argued, was perfectly capable of feeding an army. This was rich farming and grazing country. Later centuries pastured enormous cattle herds on that very plain. The Mongols did not flee a marsh, they said. They withdrew for hard political and military reasons, including stiffer resistance along the Danube than the legend admits, and yes, the pull of the succession back home. I think they land a real blow, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. On the single question of that single winter, I do not need to win, because the argument of this video was never that one cold spring in Hungary drove the Mongols out. It is something larger and harder to rebut. It is that the whole empire, measured across 70 years and 10,000 kilometers, comes to rest along the edge of the grass. One withdrawal can have a dozen causes. The shape of an entire empire cannot be a coincidence of weather. Concede the winter, and the map still stands. So let me give you my verdict, and let me be careful about what kind of claim it is, because the difference is the whole point. I'm not telling you that grass is why the Mongols marched. Ambition, organization, genius, and sheer violence are why they marched. Grass is why they stopped where they stopped. Those are different questions, and confusing them is the oldest mistake in this subject. The death of a Khan, the defeat at a spring in Galilee, a storm off Japan, these are the moments the expansion failed. The pasture is the reason it could fail there and not somewhere else. A symptom tells you when a thing broke. A cause tells you why it broke there. The politics is the symptom. The grass is the cause. The single accidents never satisfy. Blame the funeral for Europe and you still have to explain Syria and Japan and the jungles of the South, each with its own private misfortune. One border, drawn again and again by unrelated events, is not bad luck. It is a pattern wearing the mask of coincidence. There is a serious objection to even that, and it deserves a name. Historians of the Mongol state, among them Timothy May, would say I have this backwards. The Mongols conquered so much. They would argue not because of where the grass was, but because of how they were organized. The army built in units of 10 and 100 and 1,000. The meritocracy that promoted the able over the well-born. The Keshig, the imperial guard. The Yam, the relay network that carried a message across a continent faster than anything on Earth until the railway. Institutions, they would say, not ecology, made this empire. And they are right about the institutions. But watch what happens when you ask what those institutions were for. An army counted in tens and hundreds is a way of knowing exactly how many riders, and therefore how many horses, a stretch of pasture can put in the field. The relay network is a chain of stations, each one needing fresh mounts, which means each one needing grass, strung across the grassland like beads on a thread. The genius of Mongol organization is real, but it is the genius of managing a herd at continental scale. The institution does not replace the ecology, it administers it. Rashid al-Din can tell you how the empire was run. Only the grass can tell you how far it could reach. Which returns us, one last time, to that army at the gates of Europe in 1242, and to the funeral we were told saved the West. Maybe the Khan's death gave the order to turn back, but the order only formalized what the land had already decided. West of the Hungarian plain there was no more steppe, and without the steppe there was no more fuel, and without fuel even the most terrifying army in history was a fire with nothing left to burn. The Mongols did not fail to conquer Europe. They arrived at the western shore of the grass, and the grass, very quietly, said no further. We have spent centuries asking who was strong enough to stop the Mongols. It is the wrong question, and it always was. Nobody stopped them. They ran out of the one thing that no courage and no cavalry could manufacture, the green line under the horse's feet. The Mongols were never unstoppable. They were exactly as large as the grass. And for 800 years, we have mistaken the edge of a pasture for the edge of the world.